Welcome to Healing Powers TV. I'm your host, Laura Powers, and we are here live on location at Journeys for Conscious Living in Arvada, Colorado. And I'm here with Dr. Linda Backman. She's a psychologist and regression therapist, and she's been doing this for 33 years. So pleased to have you on the show today. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you, Laura. I'm thrilled to be here.
And I asked Dr. Backman to come on the show to talk about past life regression and associated and related topics, because I think this is something that will help a lot of people deal with things that are happening right now and the shifts in the world.
Okay.
So I wondered if you could start out by just talking about what past life regression is and how it can be helpful for people.
Okay. And maybe I'll just tack on very briefly, Laura, how I got into this work, which sometimes
great.
people ask me. It's like, well, what is a psychologist doing, what some people might think is unusual work. So just very, very briefly, about 18 years ago, when I was just going along, as I often say, my merry way as a general psychologist, I had a dear friend and colleague pass at the age of 32.
Okay.
And I started having spiritual experiences that I'd never had before. I started having past life memories of lives with him, spontaneous past life memories, and I could sense his presence. I could sense him talking to me, and I always jokingly say, well, was I going crazy, or was it time for the door to open? And I truly believe at this stage of the game, it was time for the door to open. So past life regression is really just what it says. It is guiding someone into a relaxed state. Now, a lot of people get nervous about that, and they go, oh, well, I can't be hypnotized. We all hypnotize ourselves. So we do this every night when we go to sleep. We relax and our brain waves shift, and that's what hypnosis is. And every morning when we wake up, same thing. So almost everyone can go into trance. And the bottom line is the client generally goes and looks at one particular past life that has some relevance to life today. That the spiritual guides of that client are really sort of pulling the strings in a way, and the client needs to go and examine a particular life and what happened. And I'll just also say all lives are not traumatic, so some people think, oh, well, I don't want to do that because I'm going to discover there was all this trauma. And often there are lives that have no trauma, but there's something about the life that is related to life today that the client needs to know about. So it's a simple explanation.
One of the things I liked when we first were talking about regression is that whatever needs to come up or is relevant will just come up in the regression session.
Exactly. So, and it's always therapeutic. So it's not like, let me go find out if I lived in Egypt, during Akhenaten's time of being the pharaoh. It's who was I, where was I, what does that have to do with my life today, and how can I learn about a particular past life that will help me move forward in my soul evolution.
Okay. And what is the process of regression therapy like?
Well, the process is really pretty simple. It's first an interview, because I want to get a sense of who is the client and get a sense of their goals. And then essentially the client either lays down or is in a reclining position, or sometimes on a table that's a bit like a massage table for some therapists. And I simply guide them with breathing and guided imagery, and it's just relaxation. And then I take them through a kind of a story and metaphor to guide them to a place where a past life begins to open up for them. And my rule, and it's probably the only rule in regression work, is that I don't put any information in the client's mind that prompts them to think who they were, where they were, and what happened. It's all spontaneous.
Oh, that's really important. So it's just really coming very naturally from the session.
Exactly. It needs to, otherwise the client is going to think, well, Linda had these hunches, or, so I don't insert content. The content all comes from the client.
And so what are some of the reasons that people might want to go through this experience themselves?
Okay. Lots of different reasons. Some of the most common reasons would be validating that we live one life to the next, because we're on a journey of developing at the soul level. So some people want to almost not exactly check out, but they want to get a sense of, is reincarnation real? Do we live one life to the next? And what does that look like? So it's sometimes validation for spiritual perspective. Sometimes it's a relationship to someone. It's like, I mean, for me, when I started having spontaneous memories, it was, why was I so caught up in my colleague's process of going through a debilitating illness? And when I learned about past life experiences with him, then suddenly it all made sense. So sometimes it explains a relationship, sometimes it explains a current health issue that we've been going through. Sometimes it explains a type of work that, maybe we're 44 years old and we've been a school teacher for that many years, but we've always wanted to do something different. And so we come to understand, oh, I've had more than one life doing a particular type of work. So those are some common reasons.
One of the things that I think is interesting is this idea that phobias have a past life reason or a past life cause.
Yeah.
Do you have some examples of that, or?
Yeah, it's interesting. A particular client comes to my mind. This is a woman who was, through her whole childhood and adult life, I think she was maybe in her 40s when I met her, afraid of water. Mm-hmm. And this is a true story, so sometimes this surprises people. It's quite this, sort of open. She had recently divorced her husband. It was a difficult relationship, and so she had divorced her husband. She decided to go on a trip to the Caribbean, and she decided she'd do some snorkeling. Mm-hmm. And she met the dive master on the. I know this is going to sound like a soap opera or a novel. It's not a novel.
Truth is stranger than fiction.
Exactly. She met the dive master. Uh-huh. They had a strong connection. And she knew there was a strong connection. They began, after the trip was over, exchanging emails and connecting. She came home, we did a regression, and we discovered that she'd had a life where she died, tied to water, and she knew this man.
Oh, wow. So it was really a healing in this life from the past. That's
she is now married to this man and has been married to him for quite a number of years.
Good for her.
So it can be just that easy. Yeah.
All right. One of the things that I found really fascinating when I was first learning about past life regression is the gender question. And, that yes, we're male or female in this life, but, what have we been in the past? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So, I'll just sit here and look at you, and in my eyes you'll morph into being a man in a past life. The bottom line to that, Laura, is that so obviously for the two of us, we're in female bodies. Right. Being in female bodies, it is almost a sure thing, this is based on repetitive regressions, thousands of regressions, that we may have been mostly female, which is quite common, but we have had male lives. I've honestly never come across a client that hadn't had at least one opposite gender life. Mm-hmm.
It's fitting. I know we're often so caught up in who we are in this, physical body, but the truth is that as a soul, we're so much more complex, right?
Exactly.
What about the issue of homosexuality? Because I think that's related.
You have good questions. Really good questions.
Thank you.
So maybe I should verify or maybe just explain that I do two types of regression. Okay. People will then understand, where does Linda get this information? So past life regression is just what it says. I do a longer type of regression called between lives regression. What that basically means is we go through a past life to the ending of the past life, and then we step into really where time collapses, and we're looking at any past life. We're looking at, who am I as a soul? We can ask any kind of a question. So let's just say the client in current life happens to be gay or lesbian. I've had lots of clients ask, well, so what is that about, and for what reason is that my lifestyle of today? Mm-hmm. Usually, almost always, someone who's gay or lesbian in this life, it's not so much like, if you think about a gay man, it's not just that probably that gay man had been a woman. Mm-hmm. It's that at a soul level, that individual, their soul, through repetitive lives, has progressed sufficiently to almost reach the point of androgyny, which is one of our goals. One of our goals as a soul is to stop thinking, it's good to be a woman or it's bad to be a man or vice versa, that we reach equal balance and comfort level with either gender.
Wow, that's fascinating. Yeah, I hadn't heard that. So actually, that reflects a level of soul development.
Absolutely.
So we haven't actually talked about soul development, so maybe that's a good segue into soul development. Okay. And the development levels of various souls, what that means, just explaining that in general.
Okay. Well, the bottom line to reincarnation is that we come into body to progress as a soul.
Okay.
So we come into body lifetime to lifetime working on progression. It's almost like if you're a child, you have to go to first grade. And if you accomplish what you need to accomplish in first grade, then you get to go to second grade, and then you get to go to third grade. Soul evolution is exactly the same. It's not better or worse to be in third grade versus 11th grade. It's just a progression of learning. And in simple terms, it's a progression toward moving away from a me perspective into a you, or looking at the greater benefit to humanity. It's a progression of moving into humility, of seeing life from, you might say, a higher vantage point.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's one thing in your book, which Dr. Backman is the author of a book called Bringing Your Soul to Light, which is an excellent book, by the way. But in the book, you give an example of, the different ages, of comparing a younger soul or newer soul to a kindergartner, and then a more advanced soul to someone in high school, and saying how it's important not to judge, because they are just different levels of soul development, which really helped me when I'm looking at something that, I think, oh, that's, not a good thing, and just saying it's okay, it's just whatever they're going through, and I don't need to think about that or worry about that too much. That's just where they are.
It's normal.
Yeah.
We've all been at all those stages, but our goal is to work toward being highly advanced as a soul, and then having the ability to become a teacher, either in body or what we would call a spiritual guide, or some kind of a guardian angel.
Yeah, this is a fascinating idea to me, that basically our lives and the afterlife, essentially we're just constantly students and teachers, that it's just this constant flow of learning and then teaching and learning and teaching.
Exactly. And that, another, going back to what you asked Laura about, what's another reason that people have past life regression, it's also to validate, and between lives regression, it's also to validate that when a loved one, we would say dies, except that from spiritual perspective, I would say transitions, that when a loved one transitions, all they're losing is the physical container. But the soul energy of that person is often still available to us, that are left behind, you might say, on earth in body.
Yeah, it's a wonderful sort of realization when it's like, not that this is the end.
Right, exactly.
So for me, at least, it was very comforting, this idea. Another sort of revolutionary idea that I read about in your book was the idea that a person can have more than one incarnation at a time.
Yes.
So
yes.
What is that about?
How
Can
does
you
that
shed some
work?
light on? Yeah.
My silly way of talking about that is that it's like, the person who comes into the circus ring, and has a foot on the back of, each foot is on the back of a horse, and you're riding,
okay.
so you think about the balancing act that requires.
Yeah.
So when we reach a certain level of soul development, it doesn't happen in first grade, probably doesn't happen in fifth grade. It happens well beyond that. Then we are able to subdivide our soul energy. So maybe let me clarify that piece. When we're in body, we bring a holographic aspect of our soul energy into our body, like you or I would have. The remainder of our soul energy resides in spirit. So at all times we're soul in body, soul in spirit. If we're developed sufficiently that we can balance more than one life at a time, we can have simultaneous, or what you might call concurrent, incarnations that we often either call parallel lives, or some people call it split lives. And the reason for that is really twofold. We're progressing faster as a soul. We're also usually at the point of also serving as a teacher, even when we're in body. So we're also providing a service to the planet.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, just for people to understand that let's say even if you have only one incarnation, that still most of your soul energy is not in body.
Right.
I mean, I think that was light bulb moment, like, wow, this is just a little bit of me, not Laura, who I am right now, but the soul is here. And essentially we can always call on that, our higher self, to help us.
Exactly. It's when we're guided, you might say, or when we feel a sense of guidance from an intuitive standpoint, We may be being guided by our spirit guide. We
Okay.
may also be guided by our own higher self that's sufficiently developed to provide guidance. Yeah.
And so if you're very, if you're an advanced soul and you happen to have more than one incarnation at a time, what happens after that? And how would you have multiple sort of lives where you have two lives at a time, two incarnations, or?
Yes, once you reach a certain level of soul development, then it might be the case, but not always, it might be the case that each time you incarnate, you always have two simultaneous incarnations.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. That it isn't necessarily a sure thing,
Mm-hmm.
but it does happen. And again, it's a way of giving back to the planet, and it's also a way of progressing your soul further.
Okay.
So the term that we're hearing a lot about in spiritual circles, we hear the term ascension.
Mm-hmm.
Ascension means our soul has reached sufficient development to operate as a guide. We may still incarnate,
Mm-hmm.
or we may no longer incarnate.
Mhm.
So that's what we're working toward.
So I find it interesting that sometimes people are so afraid of death and just really attached to being here physically,
Right.
and then to learn that really the goal is to not be here physically. I don't know, for me that was a real shift in how to think about life and what it is.
Well, it's interesting since you bring that up. There are clients who, when we do between lives regression, we find that for some clients whose souls have developed to the point that they don't have to incarnate any longer, some are thrilled. It's like, okay, good. I don't want to go back down there where it's so difficult. For others, and I hear this moderately often,
Mm-hmm.
that the comment is that some of us, and I think I'm one of these souls,
Mm-hmm.
we love Earth. We love what goes on here. We love the benefits of Earth that
Right.
are experiences that don't exist in spirit.
Mm.
So it varies,
Mhm.
from person to person and soul to soul.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah.
So another idea that was in your book and that I've heard from talking with you is the idea of repeated lives with certain souls.
Mm.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So essentially, and when I give answers, this is not that I plucked this information out of the air. It comes from repetitive clients in regression. So when we begin to incarnate as a soul, we belong to a small group of souls, usually about 8 to 15 souls.
Okay.
And those are the souls that we incarnate with most often. Now, those aren't necessarily all our current biological family members. They may be good friends. They may be your neighbor when you were 12 years old that you were really connected with. But those are the souls that we repetitively incarnate with. Those are not perfect relationships, because sometimes we contract with a soul that we know well, and they come into life to push our buttons.
Mm.
So sometimes that happens. We also incarnate with other souls that you might say come from surrounding soul groups.
Okay.
But the souls we know the most closely are those in our original group.
And is it safe to say that those in that group are at a similar level of development?
Actually, it's not safe to say
Okay.
that. Yeah,
Okay.
Good question. Good question. That's always an interesting piece of a between lives regression, where if I have a client who's quite developed, they may discover they spend almost no time with their original group, or they spend more time with one or two in their group because they're at a similar level of development, but they don't necessarily spend time with that whole group any longer. But these are these relationships that probably, if all of us think about it, it's like, oh yes, when I met so and so, it was instant connection.
Yeah, like that feeling you knew each other right away.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that brings up an interesting question about progression. I was, I guess, somewhat surprised to learn that it's not how many lives you've had.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily indicate anything, really.
Exactly. It really doesn't. Sometimes clients will come in to see me and they'll say, a very capable intuitive person told me I'd had, 1,045 lives, and that means automatically I'm quite progressed. Might be true, might not be true, because it depends on how much work we're doing in each lifetime. And even if we don't complete the agreement, the contracts that we make for a lifetime, almost always we're given multiple, opportunities in subsequent lives to keep working on something.
Okay.
And I might just tack on, a lot of people talk about karma.
Mm.
And I think it's really important to comment that karma isn't totally black and white. It isn't like, oh, well, if I had a life, let's just say I was married to you and you were my husband, for example,
Okay.
and it was really hard and you were really not nice to me, then that means I'm going to have a life where it's going to be really hard and I'm going to be really not nice to you. It's not that, one-to-one kind of relationship.
Yeah, and I think another thing that I think is interesting is this idea that it's not a punishment thing.
Correct.
It's not like, okay, you did this, so then this bad thing happens to you, or you did this good thing and this
Exactly.
good thing. It's about the growth and the experiences.
Exactly, and we can clean up what some people call karmic debt,
Mm-hmm.
not by being in relationship with someone perhaps where there had been some complication in a past life,
Mm-hmm.
but by just coming into life and doing the work that we agreed to do in this life, not work as in job work, but the agreements, and that can move us forward.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. And so how can people connect with their guides and learn more about this for themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love to help people learn about intuition, because we all have capable intuition.
Mm.
So we all are intuitive. I always say to people, we can be intuitive from a visual standpoint, like clairvoyant, that term that we use, or sometimes we're not strongly visually intuitive. We might be clairaudient, almost feeling like we're being talked to at times. Mm-hmm. We might be clairsentient, meaning there are a lot of people like this. They walk into a room and suddenly they feel an emotion they weren't feeling before they walked in, and it's not their emotion. Or the intuitive capability that I wish even in first or second grade we would teach this to children, that we can be cognitively intuitive, like I'm just getting the thought, I need to call so-and-so. I've had the thought off and on all day long, so I need to pick up the phone and call so-and-so.
Yeah, this idea that our guides or even our higher self can plant these ideas
Mm-hmm.
in us or send us messages, and it's important to listen.
Exactly.
And not just think, why does this keep occurring to me? Why do I keep getting this urge and kind of shove it away?
Or why did I have this dream?
Mm.
And that's another way that our guides download either kind of education to us or something we need to do. Dreams are trickier because sometimes they're not very straightforward, so we need to learn to be very open-ended when we think about dreams and what they mean. But in the dream state, we are easier to access by our guides because our left brain isn't, hooked in.
Right.
Yeah.
We're not questioning whatever is coming.
Exactly.
All right. So one of the things that I wonder is, when you're in a regression, what is that like as an experience, and what do you remember?
Good question. Basically, the client remembers almost everything. There may be some fine details that they don't remember. When I train people to guide past life regression and between lives regression, two things, in my opinion, have to happen.
Okay.
One is very detailed notes being taken by the therapist, so that can be, during the processing at the end of the regression, that can be examined.
Mm-hmm.
Also, a recording. So the client will remember most things.
Okay.
A lot of people think, oh, if I have a regression, I'm going to be like, almost like a zombie, and I'm not going to, that's not the case. The client is fully aware of what's going on. They're just more relaxed, and the information is coming spontaneously. But recording is always important, because the client then can go home and just listen again, and that can even deepen the value of the regression.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's great.
Yeah.
And I've heard that it's actually very relaxing. Or it can be.
It can be relaxing. So I'll say a little bit more about that. So all regressions, of course, are different. All lives that we look at are different. There are times when the client looks at a life and the life has some complication to it. So, like, for example, certain ones just stick out in my mind. I remember a male client who died in one of these landing craft, one of these boats that come along, come close to shore, and then the front drops down and out pour the soldiers. In this scene, looked at by the client, the door drops down, the troops pour out. Those troops are usually laden with all kind of equipment. The boat, the landing craft stopped too short of the beach.
Oh, okay.
In this case, this client, in fact, did die. And so the client is, in a way, experiencing that. But it's not like they're feeling like they're literally drowning. But sometimes people who've carried trauma, fear, phobia have to access the details in order to release them. On the other hand, the flip side happens with regressions, where a client comes in and says, well, I'm 52 years old, I've had 3 major relationships in my life, what's wrong with me, why can't, I have a satisfactory relationship?
Right.
I say to the client, there's likely nothing wrong with you, this is just what needed to happen. And then basically the past life that's looked at is this lovely relationship, long-term marriage, happy relationship, children, grandchildren, and that's the past life. And then the client will finish the regression and they'll say, well, is that all there is? It was too simple. It's like, no, it's not too simple. Take in and absorb the beauty of that life, because your guides are wanting you to know there's nothing flawed about you. It's just in this life, you either have not worked out finding the correct relationship that'll work for you, or you're not meant to have a relationship long-standing in this life.
That's one thing that I think is really beautiful, is to just expand your idea of what is the way, that there isn't one way, and that even as one person, that changes over time in our current life, but then also in our various incarnations.
Right. We have to take what we think are society's standards, like this kind of job or this kind of marriage or having children or whatever it might be, and we need to set those aside and say, what works for me in this lifetime, and what did I come into body to do?
Right.
What's the point?
Right.
Yeah.